I am Jimmy McInnes, and I'm the author of A More Perfect. Yeah, I've always had two major passions in life: literature and politics. So I've always been really fascinated with the kind of pageantry that goes behind campaign oratory. I began looking at it as its own genre of literature, and when I kind of came to that conclusion, I realized it was, like most things, a great opportunity to deconstruct a form of literature. I look at poetry, I guess, as a genre of writing that seeks to remove the more expository elements from writing, and just kind of let the language dance and play. So with this book, what I really wanted to do was let the wires of the speech hang loose, not really necessarily focus on the context or the content of the speech necessarily, but what the performance is trying to do. Right now, I suppose it fits into the greater tradition of long form procedural poetry. If I was to create a genre for it, it was a term I made up. I call it a reverse rhetorical translation. Now, basically, you take the full original text as prepared for delivery. You break it down into its rhetorical properties in any given amount of ways. I mean, I have sections where it'll take a phrase and it reads a little more like an instruction manual, lets you know exactly what the book is doing. There are other parts of it where it breaks it down to the word level, so it's the parts of speech. So a a word like nation would become noun. I chose that speech in particular because I wanted to challenge myself with a speech that I actually, number one, respected, one that I thought would be read again in 100 years, and one that would make the book itself a little more complex, help it fire off on any given number of cylinders. Like a genre like this, where you deconstruct a political speech, is really open to just using pure irony, just using pure cynicism. I wanted to do something that would kind of push it in a different direction. So I used this one in particular because I thought that it nailed kind of all the criteria that I wanted as far as where the rhetoric would go. It examined things like deflection. It examined things like the anecdote, and I think those were essential to what I was trying to present. I actually don't think it's important at all. I mean, the nice thing about any kind of book of innovative poetry is that it can be read in a different number of ways, with a different number of contexts involved. Uh, I mean, it's wonderful if you know the speech inside out and you can kind of play and choose exactly decide what I'm saying where. Say, oh, okay, that must be that part of the speech, that must be that part of the speech. But I think it's also fun to think of it as the text is something that can be left completely open, that someone can go into it not knowing anything about the historical context of that election, that particular speech, and just kind of, do a paint by numbers. They can make their own speech in their head. They can get their own ideas about what this speech is supposed to be projecting. Yeah, I definitely thought about using a Canadian speech. I decided this one hit the right notes and used all of the rhetorical elements. And it was the most important thing is that it was the right length. It was the perfect size for a book length work of poetry if you're going to go through this type of procedural work. The poem itself, I think, can be completely removed from its historical and its national context. I hoped to kind of remove kind of emphasize the signifier over the signified in this. So I wanted to be able to read as if it could have been a speech delivered by any person in any country. Whether or not I'm successful with that, that's up to the reader to decide. The idea of being completely removed from the process of the election. I mean, obviously, American and Canadian relations have a long history. We have a long economic and social history. I mean, we basically came from the same colony at one point in time. But I think, being removed as we are, we're able to analyze it in the importance of a particular given speech in a much different way than the average American can. We have a very different social context here. We have a stronger social democratic background than they do in the United States. So when a speech addresses something like healthcare, we have a completely different context of thinking about the idea of for example, healthcare than the average American voter would. I want readers to be able to, on top of just learn to enjoy what language is doing by itself, I really want them to be able to see the political speech, or really any form of expository communication, as its own form of literature, as something that's as manipulated as any form of poetry, any form of fiction. That's, I think, what I really want. I want them to be able to take away from it the joy of analysis. I make my day-to-day living as a fundraiser, so I have to be really charming and convincing all the time over the phone, mostly. Writing this piece, I think the work that I've been doing politically, on whether it be the municipal, federal, or provincial levels, did a lot to help prepare me for this, to just get me into the right headspace, that I have to be as succinct and examine the language as closely as I possibly can, and really put thought into how I present every single part of the work. I've always been one to argue that poetry and politics really aren't too dissimilar. I mean, they're all about the manipulation of language. And when I use the term manipulation, it's not meant in any pejorative sense. It's just the control that you have over the particular text that you're trying to create. So, I mean, if you have an amount of control over what you're doing in a poem, you'll write a successful poem. If you don't have control over the language you're using in the poem, you're not going to write a very successful poem. Language is how it's how we shape our world. It's how we understand our reality. And I mean, the same, very similar with politics, especially in the information age. If you're unable to kind of control and manipulate the language, you're not going to have a successful campaign. You're not going to get your point across. Name of municipality. Name of state, province, or region. Name of month. Name of date of month. Name of year. All Gregorian. As prepared for delivery. Begin speech with relevant historical quotation. Quote, plural pronoun, definite article, collective plural noun, comma, preposition, verb, idiom, preposition, verb, indefinite article, comparative, adverb, adjective, noun, period, end quote. State how long ago these words were spoken. State exactly where they were spoken in the proximity to where we are now. Give a veiled idea of how many people were there. Gender these people who were there when these words were spoken. Highlight the ease in which any collection of words is spoken, and then contrast that ease with the potential impact that words could have on a country's political ideology. Allude to an engagement between the working class and the information class. Allude to an engagement between the political class and a transcending term for those who love their their country. Make mention that these groups had all congregated to where these words were spoken, when these words were spoken, for similar reasons these words were spoken, and reference the specific legislative action that was taken following these words being spoken. Be sure to highlight that the legislative action that was taken following these words being spoken was indeed a physical action and not merely a theoretical one. Provide a disclaimer to the above statement that the physical action taken to fulfill the theoretical action remained in itself an incomplete action. Remind the audience that unanimously hated act of racial subjugation not only delayed the physical and theoretical action that was taken following these words being spoken, but that also unanimously hated act of racial subjugation was fundamentally connected to the history of relevant nation. Make sure to note that the issue of unanimously hated act of racial subjugation was a particularly controversial one that divided relevant nation on geographic lines. Make sure to note that the issue of unanimously hated act of racial subjugation divided those present when these words were spoken to the extent that the physical action taken to fulfill the theoretical action remained in itself an incomplete action with regard to unanimously hated act of racial subjugation for an approximate amount of time after these words were spoken. Note that those present when these words were spoken chose a general term for a group of people to be born at a later date as the adequate party to take theoretical and physical action regarding unanimously hated act of racial subjugation as it pertained to the legislative action. Beginning with the use of an idiom. Assure the audience that the theoretical action for unanimously hated act of racial subjugation was something fundamental to the physical action taken after these words being spoken. Explain that the action taken after these words being spoken had essentially contained an ideal regarding the nature of fairness under an organized judicial system. Add that the action taken after these words being spoken contained the following attributes. 1. Had promised freedom from arbitrary or despotic control. 2. Had contained the moral principle determining just conduct. 3. Had defined the terms for a group of political bodies with the ability and need to become the concept of the ideal over the progress of an unspecified amount of dates. Interject this list of favorable characteristics regarding the theoretical action taken after these words being spoken by highlighting the fact that the theoretical action taken after these words being spoken was insufficient in materializing as a physical action regarding unanimously hated act of racial subjugation. Clarify in the second clause of the sentence that the theoretical action taken after these words being spoken should have, but failed to, apply in full to 2 of the genders included in all racial groups and all religious affiliations actively associated with relevant nation. Emphasize that the burden regarding unanimously hated act of racial subjugation had to be shifted to those who came after these words being spoken. Divert mid-phrase in order to reinforce this point by providing broad examples. Divert mid-phrase in order to reinforce this point by providing spatial examples. Divert mid-phrase in order to reinforce this point by providing historical examples. Underscore that those who came after these words being spoken stood to lose short-term in pursuing the above examples. Now return to your original point, highlighting that those who came after these words being spoken remain with the burden of the disconnect between theory and practice of the action taken after these words were spoken in their particular historical context. Bridge a connection between the action that was taken following the aforementioned words being spoken and the current historical moment as it pertains to those present. Clarify that this has always been a policy objective of great importance. Dramatize this connection between the action that was taken following the aforementioned words being spoken and the current historical moment as it pertains to those present by using a physical metaphor. Emphasize that the physical metaphor you're using is helpful in articulating the goal of achieving list of abstract ideals for relevant nation. Transition now from the collective we to the first person I, while still emphasizing that your current status as a candidate for relevant office stems from the need for the collective we. Make the point that all contrasts inherent in the collective we are derived merely from one's own personal narrative. Confront these differences by emphasizing a list of similar personal aspirations. Continue to flesh out this point by highlighting obvious differences of appearance and location. Drive this point home by returning to the physical metaphor as it pertains to the need for the collective we. Articulate that the physical metaphor symbolizes improved conditions for one's own kin at a later date. State that your optimism is grounded in the confidence that list of flattering qualities can be attributed to the citizens of relevant nation. Use this last statement as a springboard to reintroduce your own first-person narrative and how it pertains to the goals of the collective we. Pause for applause.